Hi. So, in beginning to look at studying the moon with first graders, I think the place to start, rather than what the moon is or what causes it to look the way it does to us, which we'll get into later, is just empowering kids to notice it for themselves. And for anybody, it can be tricky to observe the moon. And for city kids, all the more so, of course, because there's so many buildings in the way. But here's some tricks that can help make it a little bit easier. One, help kids know where to look to find the moon. And two, sensitize them to the different ways that it might look, the different shapes it might have. And that also might make them interested in looking for it because it's kind of a surprise. What's it going to look like this time? So we're going to talk in this video about where to look for it, what it might look like, and a little hands-on activity you can do with kids to get them engaged in the different shapes the moon might take. So, where to look for it. In the same way that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and we know that's because the earth is rotating in that direction, but we don't need to get into that yet. With kids, that'll come a little later. So in the same way that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and probably without even thinking about it, you know that intuitively, because you know when you wake up in the morning, where's the sun? Is it shining into a particular window of your apartment, or is it shining on a building across the street or something like that? And you may be aware of on some part of your where you walk during the day at lunchtime, around where do you see the sun, or where are the shadows, and or if you look out your apartment window, where do you see the sun at different times of day? So intuitively you kind of have a sense of the path of the sun. Your students may not, because that's not so much their focus is more on themselves. So you can attune them to that by giving them some activities that involve noticing the sun on its journey through the day. And if they're at home, they can look out the window at a few times during the day and see, do they see it shining on a building? Do they see it in the sky? And get them to kind of become aware of what is the path of the sun in relation to them. Because that's the same path that the moon travels. Sometimes I like to say that it's the road that the sun drives on. So the sun drives on a particular road across the sky, the moon drives down the same road. And again, we know it's because the earth is rotating, but we don't need to talk about cause yet. Right now we're just attuning the kids to noticing where to look. So first step, get the kids to notice the path or the road that the sun drives down, and that's where they can look to find the moon. And the tricky thing about the moon is that you can look at any time of day or night to find the moon, because the moon isn't only out at night. That is a common misconception, that the moon is only observable at night. But the moon could be out at any time of day or night. So kids should get used to, anytime they have a chance, to look out the window at that path or road that the sun travels on. Anytime they can take a look, see if they can find the moon. They could look at night, they could look during the day. Anytime, take a look at that path and see if they see the moon. And that brings us to our second point. What does the moon look like? What are they looking for? Well, as you know, the moon is sometimes full, sometimes it's a crescent, and sometimes when there's a new moon, you don't see it at all. So it could be any of those things. And here's a little hands-on activity you could do to engage the kids in noticing the different shapes the moon can take. So right here, I have cut out 2 circles. I made them by tracing around the end of my flashlight, but you could obviously trace around anything, like the bottom of a jar, and then I cut them out. These are kind of cardstock, so they have a little bit of stiffness to them, but they could be regular paper, and I colored one of them black. You could use black construction paper, and then if you just slide them across each other with the black one in front of the white one. Just a side note, obviously this isn't why the moon has the shape it does. There isn't a black disc sliding in front of a white disc in the sky. We know that. Again, we're not getting into cause yet. That'll come later. Right now, we're just getting kids to play with the different shapes. So, if you slide this all the way across, it's gone. The moon has vanished. And then if you slide it slightly off, you get a very thin crescent moon. You could ask the kids, what does that look like to you? What does it remind you of? I always think it reminds me of a fingernail clipping. Or you could say it reminds you of, I don't know, what will they come up with? That's what poets do. So many poems written about the nature and the moon, because it is fun to see what these shapes remind us of. And then if you slide it and it gets a little bit bigger, what does that shape remind you of? Maybe 2 scoops of ice cream. Gets bigger and bigger, and boom, then it's a full moon. And this isn't quite the shape of a gibbous moon, as it's called. It actually curves kind of the other way. But this is just sort of a fun way to see what kind of shapes you can come up with, and think of words to associate with the different shapes. And maybe you could find some poems about the moon. And the goal again is just to sort of empower the kids to really notice the moon, because whatever study you do of the moon and what causes it isn't really going to soak into them unless you've awakened them to noticing it themselves. So that's the goal of this first lesson. Have fun.